Hello and welcome to the webinar. The title of the webinar is Mobile Testing, the Relation Between Tests, Business Goals and Design Considerations, and it will be presented by Derk-Jan de Grood. If you have any questions for Derk-Jan, please type them into the questions field on your control panel, and we will address these questions to Derk-Jan directly after the webinar. A recording of this webinar, as well as a copy of the slides, will be available on the EuroSTAR website after the webinar. You can join the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag ESConf, and you can also connect with Derk-Jan using the Twitter handle @Derk-Jan de Grood. So now I'm going to hand you over to today's presenter, Derk-Jan. Hello, Derk-Jan.
Hi, how you doing? I'm gonna, let me see, show my screen first. That will be a good thing. If everything goes right, you can see my presentation slides right now. And we're trying for the first time now to have the little webcam available as well. So you can see me talk. I think that is much more engaging than just watching the pictures as well. Hey, welcome everybody. Quite a big number, so I'm really pleased that you all take an interest in mobile testing. And well, today I'd like to talk about mobile testing, of course. But I want to focus in on the relationship that I think there are between tests, the business goals, and some design considerations that we need to make when we start developing mobile apps. What will I show you? Well, I will start with telling you what you should test if you do some app testing. And funny enough, a lot of the presentations that I saw seem to be focusing on that item. So I won't elaborate too much on it. But I want to start off with it just to give some indication and to get started. But from that, I hope we can derive to how mobile testing is actually embedded in the development life cycle and what we should do in order to prepare our tests and what drives our tests. And those are, of course, the design considerations and the choices that we're making while building our app. And from that, I think naturally we drive into a small discussion in what testers can contribute to the mobile app development lifecycle. And it might be just a little bit more than just executing those tests that we listed in the first point. So the answers that I'm going to give is that there is a relationship between the business goals, the design considerations that we make while developing, and those drive the tests. So just to give it away in the first minute, just a little bit. Well, let me start off with apps. Apps and mobile are immensely hot right now. And when I last year found this picture about the installation of the new Pope, it was published as to say, like, society is really changing. Because look at the same event in 2005, where everybody was just looking at what was happening, whereas in the last year, when the new Pope was installed, everybody was holding a tablet, a mobile phone, making pictures, making tweets, whatever kind of stuff. I know there are some discussions about this picture. You might have heard them. Where people were saying, like, it's not really a fair comparison because the Apple picture in 2005 is taken in some kind of alley without a direct line of sight on the real ceremony. So that's why nobody's actually making pictures. Well, that could be the case. But still, I think this picture represents a little bit where we're in. We're in a world where mobile is getting hot, at least in perception. Everybody who's following some blogs or some tweets probably has found some infographics which states that the selling of mobile tablets exceeds the selling of laptops and that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's happening there, and I think a lot of us feel that we need to do something with mobile testing. And that's basically the driver for me to get into that. And I did some investigation and I made a mind map, which you can probably not read in the small detail, but that was just to guide my thoughts about what's really happening there and what are things to consider if I would be asked to ask tests a mobile device, or if I would get involved in the development of a mobile device. And the idea behind this mind map is basically the history of my presentation, which is a book which is not yet published yet. So the history of my presentation lies in the future, maybe. Because Julian Harty is working on a book, and the working title is A Primer in Testing Mobile Apps. And I happen to be one of the reviewers of that book, which was a great opportunity for me to dive in the subject and to learn a little bit more on testing mobile apps. And a lot of the stuff that I learned from app testing, etc., I've learned from Julian Harty during various meetings. So I was very pleased that I decided to write them down. And while reading the book, while commenting to Julian about improvements, I kind of made that mind map, and as it grew along and I started talking with customers that we have about the mind map, we elaborated a little bit further. And from that I thought, now I know what I want to tell when I'm talking about mobile apps. And that's basically what I'm going to squeeze in this presentation. First, what do you need to test if you start testing mobile apps? What happens if you're just a tester at some department in some organization, like you probably are, and then the organization decides to do an app? And I say, like, you're the tester, you should be involved in the testing of the app. What would you want to change? And what would you want to test? What's different? And I remember that one of my colleagues, who might be listening today as well, we had a discussion where I said, oh, I got a whole mind map and I got ideas. He said, well, we just did it. So I think I know what's in your mind map, because I was at a company and, well, we needed to test an app, and we just sat down, thought cleverly, and tested some things. And it can't be that different, because functional testing is still functional testing. And I agree with him to a certain extent, because I think functional testing is indeed functional testing. But when you start testing apps, there might be more things to consider. So in the mind map, let's move down to the left down corner, where I'm trying to put in some stuff that you could think about when you start testing mobile apps. And all the way up there in the upper corner, you can see that it says functional. It's just like any application. So I give you that. But there are other things that you could consider. One thing that devices have that's different from a desktop application or something like that is that you have various inputs. Of course, we all have keyboards, but some devices have virtual keyboards, others have hardware keyboards. You can have swipes, you have gyroscope, GPS, you got Bluetooth connections. And I think there might be a growth market in this as well. There will be a growth in I think, how do you call those things, devices and sensors, etc., that will create their input to the applications and to the mobile devices. One thing maybe in the medical world, we get little devices that measure our heartbeat, etc. So in the ideal situation, we would get an SMS on our app or private doctor saying, like, your heartbeat is going like crazy, you should relax a little bit more, that kind of stuff. So if we enter that growth market, there will be a lot of new applications that we want to test that have multi-connections, etc. But inputs, it's a thing that we should address, I think. If we have inputs, and if we're using our mobile device in order to do transactions, we have interruptions. So we should test some of the interactions, I think, that we do, some of the transactions. In those transaction flows, we should take into account that we can have a call, that a message might come in, that we set our alarm on our agenda, that it's just interrupting our transaction, and what will happen afterwards. If we switch back to the application in which we're making the transaction, will it pick up? And of course, that has some kind of security issue in it as well. From a customer point of view, I would like, if I make a bank transaction or if I'm buying something on a web shop, I would like my transaction to start further where I just was. But where is that information being stored? Is that stored on the server? Is that being stored in my device on a place? And is that accessible for other people as well? Interesting things to think about. Other interruptions that you could have is, of course, network loss, because you're traveling around on your mobile, you're doing your transactions, and the network goes low. The power goes low. I always have power problems. And then you got various connections. So, testing point of view, we should regard the inputs, we should regard the operational flows that we want to test, the transactions that we make, and we should have various interruptions that come along the way. Some other things that we could think about, and let me start off to the right with, I cannot read it because I got a webinar screen, sorry, is the resource usage. Of course, when we're testing mobile apps, we all know that the devices are limited with respect to our desktop computers. So we have power usage, memory usage, storage usage. I make a lot of pictures and movies, so whenever I'm somewhere and I want to make a lot of pictures but I'm running out of memory, storage memory, and I just look at the biggest app that I have and I delete it. So storage, yeah, is an issue if you want your app to be on someone's device for a long time. Power drain is of course an interesting thing. Batteries are not better than they are, but if you have an app that's known to drain the battery very quickly, a lot of users might tend to go to an alternative solution. But resource usage can also be seen with a support site. So if you link to a website, of course, or a back office server, what's happening there? Do you have enough resources? Does that process really work? So that leads me to the integration part, which you could think about. Well, we have the back office, like discussed before, but also app-to-app communication. You see it more and more. I like to make some music. I use GarageBand on the iPad quite a lot, where I can make various instruments and make stuff. But very nicely is that I can buy other instruments and I can control them from a GarageBand app, so I can add stuff. From an app development point of view, that means that you're either the market leader and you want to create an open interface, so other developers can actually click into that and that will increase the value of your app. Or if you're not the market leader, you might want to build that extra instrument that integrates with the market leader or whatever context you are in. So you want to apply to certain rules and open standards. So integration and interoperability is an issue. Another things of interoperability and portability are, of course, various OS versions, different devices with different screen sizes, with different hardware things, with different sensors, and various web browsers that you might want to use in your application. So those are just some things that you can think about, which I think tell a slightly different story than just doing the functional testing that you normally did when you were testing the traditional app. So from that, I like to zoom out a little bit on my mind map, and I think there's a circle where we're thinking about things that we need to test, but where those tests come from and where does that lead to. And let's talk a little bit about that, because when I was listening at conferences, I heard a lot of stories about those differences that I just summarized, but now I think the real value in the story might be in the surrounding areas. Let us start first in why are apps being built and who's building apps. Just recently I saw an infographic, and the sources in the corner, where people were saying like 84% of organizations that are not currently building mobile apps are planning to do so in the near future. 84% of organizations that do not have a mobile app yet, but probably will in the near future. So I think this confirms my idea that a lot of organizations are just starting with mobile apps. Have just built their first or third mobile app, and a lot of organizations did not really do that. And that makes a difference. That makes a completely different scenario than we would have in a traditional legacy system things. For one thing, it means that those organizations are considering it and are thinking about why they want to build an app. And I can imagine some old school legacy system which has been in the basement for 20 years, that if you start asking as a tester, like why is this system built and what do we want with this system and what are the business goals we're trying to have, they'll look at it silly and say like, well, we're stupid testers. Don't ask those silly questions. The system is just there. It's part of our backlog. It's part of our environment. We need it to do the transactions. So don't talk about business goals. Just focus on the functionality. That makes it very difficult for us as testers sometimes to bridge and report on business value and in the way the organization might reach its goals with a certain application. But with apps, those questions are answered recently or in the near future, and they're available, and they're the trifle, really realistic questions that gain importance, because they need to decide why they want to build an app, and why should you build an app. In my mind map, in my quest for information, I came to certain lists of goals, and I'll walk through them. One of the things we all know, the Angry Bird kind of stuff. So some people are just building apps in order to gain some revenue. So they just want to make something which is very nice, and a lot of people buying them for 80 cents, and they become millionaires, right? I think a lot of organizations want to have a mobile app because it's just hot. Remember the picture I started, it's a gaining market. We need to be there. We want to investigate that. We want to be in the App Store because then we are more modern organization. So it's just a marketing kind of thing. But a lot of organizations that I come, they have much more, well thought business goals, and they want to provide existing service in a more flexible way. They might want to have the same product, but think they can reach out new customers in new channels. So they use the mobile channel to find new customers. They may want to add extra services to their existing services package, or they want to lower the threshold for buying stuff. So basically like a web shop, they still have the same stuff, but rather than going to the website, log in, etc., you just got one button. Maybe you identify you're using your SIM. It's locked with your credit card. So whenever you feel like buying something, you click on it. It has the GPS in it, so it's being delivered straight away. Think about pizzas, for instance. Then there are, of course, organizations that do not want to improve their business, but are just in there just to retrieve that information that you're having. So they might create a free app that gives them a lot of nice information about how people use the app or are using their mobile device, or where they are, that kind of stuff. There's some research, and what I really like is the cost reduction part, because I think that reason came in later for me. It was not the first one that I thought about. But you see a lot of organizations that want to reduce the calls on the help desk and are moving towards some kind of my organization environment where customers can automate, subscribe or desubscribe to certain parts of services. Think about insurances. So they can do it themselves, so you don't need the back office anymore. You reduce a lot of cost by not having to answer those calls. Another thing could be solving problems more quickly. You could think about your local government, and it makes a nice app where the street light's not working or the traffic light is broken. You can just send an SMS or whatever, like I've complained. Oh, I got the GPS data here. This is where I am. This is my complaint. They can solve that more easily, and you don't need to have a whole registration desk taking those calls. So a lot of reasons why you can make an app, and that's for organizations, of course, to sort out and make their decisions. From that, if we know why we want that, there are some considerations that we need to take. And I will have some more technical considerations and some general considerations. And most people who are interested in web and mobile might be familiar with the distinction between native and web applications and the hybrid, of course. But for those who don't, I think it matters depending on your business goal. And a nice example of a native application could be the SatNav. If you've been abroad and used your Google using a 3G connection in order to find your map, you might have been surprised by a rather large bill on your doormat when you got home. So yes, it would be nice if all the traffic information is stored locally on your device, so you can use it without having any extra costs or without having to be reliable on an internet connection. So that's typically a native app. In my first impression, I thought native apps were the coolest ones because then you could make the games, etc. You were independent and you distinguished yourself from just being a website. Because what's the difference from watching a website in an app and watching it in my browser? But then I learned with my discussions that a lot of organizations rather have a website, a web application, because then they don't have problems with version control. They have much more insight in what people are using, and they can push nice information or advertisements, etc. So they prefer to have a website, a web application, and all include that in their mobile strategy. And of course, there's something in the middle, which is like a hybrid, and a nice example would be my tracker for my flights if I go to a conference, which is a kind of mix. because it contains a lot of information like the graphics, like the information on some airports that's available without the internet connection. So that makes it cheap for me to use. But then it relies, of course, in the real traffic data of certain flights which are being delayed, whether it's departed already or not, etc. So I need to have an internet connection. So that makes it a hybrid. So it might be nice to think about what goals do you have and what kind of app type would fit that one best. Another high-level consideration that you might want to take is the granularity of your app landscape. Apps are best sold and most attractive if they are single purpose. When people can download it, it's a small application, it's not much to download, it doesn't take that much of your storage space, and it's easy to explain to users or to somebody else what the app is for. So you know in certain situations, now I need this app because this app will help me with that function. But then you could imagine that if you're a company and you're developing apps and people Google your company name in the App Store, you don't want to have like 30 apps available, because which one would you choose? So that will probably drive you to make bigger applications that are multi-purpose. But then they're bigger. If I'm out of storage space, I always delete the biggest application, so the chance of being deleted is bigger. Updates are more frequently, etc. So it's something to challenge, to weigh. What do you want? How much do you put in one app? How much do you distinct for that? And a high level is, of course, for what device will you actually develop? What devices will you support? And I think some app boutiques have great statistics on the most average app, but it also depends for whom you are developing, of course, because some apps might trigger real hip modern users to have the latest model, but then if you do something like the waiting lines for the elderly home or the elderly home menu, you might expect that those elderly people are not up to date with the latest device. So where are we now in this presentation? I started talking about the goals, right? So I made some distinction about what can you test, but then I said, well, let's look at the bigger picture. And first of all, why should we build an app? And that's a decision that a lot of people are making right now, because 84% or something are thinking about starting in the mobile world. And we had some app type considerations about the device type, or whether we do a hybrid of a native application. And if we made those decisions and align them with the target users and our goals, the next step would be to design our app in greater detail. So I would like to show you some design considerations that I thought were quite an eye-opener. But first, I'll make a sip of coffee. One of the things, and that definitely comes for Julian's book, it's about the active region. So this usability item. So you can imagine that if you want to place buttons somewhere on your device, well, you need to reach them. Depending on your target audience, your users, kids have small hands, so they might not be able to reach that in the middle. Just something to think about. What design, GUI design do you do? Where do you put your controls? I had a nice conversation with the mobile product manager of a telecom organization in the Netherlands, and he was explaining to me that he liked to add some extra functionality that attracts people to use an app, because installing is one thing, but remember them, like you got a nice app, maybe you want to use it. He said, well, we need some generic campaign functionality. And those could be, for instance, notifications. So you have some maintenance stuff. The back office is down in the weekend, or production distortions, or maybe some notifications that you have a new app, or you have an offer, or you organize a nice event. But what triggered me most was the production distortions, because I really like that. I did some work for the Dutch Railway, and well, the people in the Netherlands know that whenever there's something going wrong with the running of the trains, there's a lot of complaints. There's a lot of tweets, a lot of anger, a lot of frustration. It really hits people, and they start communicating, and they start being angry because they just want to go home, and the trains aren't running, and there's no information available, etc., etc. So production distortions could be a very nice way to manage or manipulate your users by providing some information in advance. Because the perception will be completely different if you have a mobile device and the Dutch railway would be saying like, we have currently a disruption, this and this is the cause, these are the solutions, this is the delay, and people will respond to that in a different way. So that might be a nice way to get some customer intimacy, one of the reasons maybe to start with app development as well, by providing, well, problems in your operational organization. But you could also add surprises in order to make people like the app. And he was explaining that he had some like happy birthday message that popped up, hey, nice, or he had some actions where you could win a free prize. So there are some things people expect apps to deliver something funny, something useful, and you could add that and you should design that. But what he stated, make it generic, because you don't want to do an update, of course, on your app each time you have a new campaign. So you should design some generic campaign functionality that you can use as a channel for whatever campaign you have. Just something to think about. I think this aligns with the app type considerations. What kind of app do you have? How can you send those generic campaign notifications? On your mobile strategy, why do you want to sell? Why do you want to make an app? Do you want to sell app? Do you want to deliver services? Do you want to have that customer intimacy like I explained? Or do you want to reduce costs because people manage their own My Company site? And maybe you want to have offers in there, like click the new product. Whatever you choose, of course there will be a link with operations. Because if you make a generic campaign functionality, you have to organize who will create the offers, who will define the surprises that you offer. Otherwise it's just a waste of building it. And you might get a feeling where I'm getting to, that it's nice to make these kind of features. It's nice to think about whether we need it, but it's also not necessarily nice to test it if it's not being used in operations. So these things should be aligned. Just some other things you could think about. Security, how is data stored? What data is sent to the host? And is there maybe some data that unintentionally, English is still a difficult language sometimes, is being locked? And I had some nice conversations and saw some presentations on some conferences where one guy actually showed that he traced down all the loggings on the interface with his device and was really digging into those just to see what happens and what was actually sent to what services. And he found that a lot of information is being shared. And he even found somewhere in the logging in hexadecimal string. I thought, oh, just some figures probably. I go, no, let's wait. Let's see what's in there. So he transferred the hexadecimal string into readable text string, found that his personal contact details were actually being shared. And worse than that, they were not only shared, people took some effort to hide that eventually, so he wouldn't really see that. And that's an interesting thing, because there might be some organizations that really trigger on getting that information, so you're on one side of the spectrum. There are other organizations, of course, that definitely do not want any data from their users being shared. But do you know whether that's the case? Do you know how the software is being developed? Do you know, especially if you use like an app boutique that builds the app for you, what's really put in there? Maybe the developers just pick some random stuff from other applications or generic modules from the internet. And maybe there might be some stuff in there that you really don't want to be there. So if you don't want that, if you absolutely feel that trust and reliability is a crucial thing of your organization towards your customers, you might need to test those traces just to verify that it's not really there. If you have app payments, you might want to decide whether you do that via the App Store, via a payment provider or a carrier billing. And maybe you should design some resource using, like caching mechanism or prefetching. Prefetching is, of course, that while I'm typing on my mobile, just in the contact form, it's already retrieving some information from the server on the background that when I said publish, I already have the next stuff cached in my device. So it looks rather fast, although the connection is not really that fast. And this is where testing comes in, of course. These are things that if we give that clever thought and we really put those things in because we think they contribute to the reasons why we built those apps in the first place, should we not test it? If we take the effort to design and to build a special caching mechanism so we can reduce the air traffic, should we not test whether the air traffic is actually reduced to a certain amount? So design considerations and design choices that we make lead the tests. And of course that's nothing new, that's always the same thing, except for with that legacy system that's been in the basement for 20 years, we don't know the design considerations. We don't know why people decided to build the system, so it's very hard to do so. With old systems, the time between the decision to build it and actually the end of the project is quite a long time. So it's much more difficult to make that tension arc, I would say, like to build that bridge. With app testing, it's happening now. Those decisions are on the table, and the development time of an app isn't that long. So it all comes back together. So that drives the things that I think are still valid. These are the things that we should test. I showed you them earlier. But now we know what drives these tests and why we want to test. And I think we can play a role in that. And why is that? It's about the way that apps are being built, and that gives us some opportunities. Talking about a telecom product manager in IT, he was complaining quite a lot on the way that actually apps came to existence, because he was trying in his organization as a wide mechanism to define how apps should look, to make sure that the user customer experience was equal in all the apps. And then he found out that different parts in the organization were developing their own app. And for one time, that has to do, a lot of organizations are building it for the first time. So app development does not really run the same process through the organization like normal IT does. The other thing is a lot of apps are being done decentral because they're cool, they're cheap, so you don't have to go all the way in IT to get budget to make an app. A lot of people get enthusiastic about it, so you can do that in your own department. So that makes it, yeah, kind of difficult. And for one thing, it might be that you have, from a management point of view, you have a lot of things in mobile strategy, whatever, but then people don't know you have it and just develop their own app somewhere in the organization. On the other hand, you're trying to align things and you're trying to develop your app, and you don't know that management actually has a mobile strategy. From my mind map, those items, and where normally in traditional organization or the traditional development, we might be sent back to the corner where people would say, hey, you're just a tester, you go sit in your corner, you do those tests, here are the specifications. Apps are almost always developed in an agile way. So that means that the roles are much more open, there's less documentation, so we're allowed to move around in the organization and in our team freely, and we're allowed to adapt some roles that we really like. And I think there is a lot of things to think about, and maybe we can adapt some of those things. Just one item that I didn't mention before, building the app is one thing, keep it running in operations is just another thing. So how is the back office support being done? If somebody is developing within his department using App Boutique just a small app, what's actually considered about doing the OS updates? I hire an App Boutique and it says, like, oh, I can build this app. I think I know what you want. I can build that in 2 weeks. Does that contract include also US updates, OS updates, or is there extra costs? If I decide to do some Google Analytics because I want to retrieve that information from you using your mobile, what do I do with that analytics? What do I do with that data? Is there somebody that actually makes the reports and shares that in the organization? To whom? And what decisions are being made in that? If I decide new features, or if I want to make a campaign or a surprise using my generic campaign channel, who's actually doing that? So a lot of things to consider and maybe to address, because I think a lot of managers are not aware of that. I think a lot of boutiques that are great app builders will not get in the chair of thinking for you as an organization. So there's some gaps in the middle, and who will who will align those things, who will see the long lines of success and will address things and say like, well, for these reasons, you might want to consider this. Or for this reason, you need to make a decision on how you do the app in operations. Otherwise, it will not be a success. So there's a big circle, and we testers can take their place. And I think there's a need for people that, on one hand, understand mobile, and it is a technical thing, because there's a lot of issues, like I showed you in the other thing, that are really concerned with how apps are working, how mobile devices are working. A lot of those testing needs to be done in an automated fashion, if not only for multiple browser tests and in order to repeat your tests on more than one device. So it has a technical aspect. But there's real value in people that understand the technique, but also understand the context and can guide the organization towards a successful implementation. And by that, I think we testers can make a big difference, because we know how to talk with the business, we know how to talk with the developers, we probably know how to work with the operational departments, we know the business, and if we address those items and guide them and tell them like, you should think about this, you should think about that, if you want to make success, consider these kind of things, we can really make a difference, and we can make those apps an absolute success. And I'd like to thank you for listening to my webinar, and I hope this will benefit you in making the difference in your organization. So thank you very much. Derek, you can open things for Q&A.
Thank you very much for that webinar, Derk-Jan. I'm just going to open up my screen here now, and we'll go through your Q&A session. Okay. So as I just mentioned there, we will now open the floor to your questions. So if you have any questions for Derk-Jan and you haven't already typed them, you can do so now by typing them into the questions field on your control panel. You bear with me for 1 second here now. The screen's just frozen on me momentarily. There we are. So while you are typing your questions, let me bring your attention to the EuroSTAR webinar archive. Here you can get access to over 90 on-demand webinars, as well as this webinar with Derk-Jan, and you can also get a copy of the slides. And here's a look at some of the webinars we have coming next month. So on Tuesday the 11th of March at 2 p.m. we have a webinar with BJ Rodison entitled Better Practices for Crafting Automated Tests. And we have a second webinar on Tuesday the 25th of March at 2 p.m. with Rob Lambert entitled Moving to Weekly Releases, a Journey. So visit the EuroSTAR webinar, our EuroSTAR website for details on how you can register for these webinars. We hope you can make it. So now let's take a look at some of the questions that are coming in. The first question I have for you now, Derk-Jan, is you talk about a mobile strategy that organizations can have. Can you give an example?
Yeah, I think I can. Actually, I thought that those are one of the more interesting stuff, because I went to a lot of organizations and customers of organization to talk about, well, whether my mind map was okay. And they started explaining what they wanted to do with mobile and with their apps. And most often the app was just one little piece in a whole story, where I talk with, for instance, insurance companies that say like, well, we want to have people to live healthy, and we want to stimulate that, so we make campaigns, a little bit like on this channel. So we want them to stimulate and share with us how they think about their health. We want to reward them with them, so maybe we need to do some campaigns where we know their profiles, so we need to know their social media, so we can offer them things that they really like. So it's rather big story where data retrieval, social media, all comes together in trying to get that customer aligned with you and have that close with you. And mobile, of course, is a very good thing, because nothing is more close than holding your mobile phone in your breast pocket. You carry it on your heart. So if you are in there and it's just part of a bigger story, yeah, you might achieve that goal. So it's a bigger thing than just building an app, and that's what I call the mobile strategy. I hope that suits the question.
The next one, mobile context.
Yeah, I think I shortly addressed that. I think most mobile tests are being done in an automated fashion. There's of course a lot of mobile swiping kind of stuff. So I see organizations that still test their app manually. But then since there's a great variance in different devices, screen sizes, etc., you often have to repeat those tests often over and over again. So you might want to need automation just to make sure you have the multi-browser testing okay. And then if you start playing around with network connections that are losing with interruptions, etc., what becomes difficult to do that manually. And you might want to test more often as well because you're doing agile development. So I think most of the apps are being tested in an automated way. And so yeah, it drives test automation faster than it does in ordinary development cycles.
And there's another question there asking what automation tools are you using for mobile app testing?
Well, I'm not really a tool expert in that. So I'm looking at that myself as well. And I played around this on my blog. Saw some video where I made my iPhone, connected that to an app which I just downloaded from the internet as a trial, just to see whether I could install an app on it and run some tests on that. That worked great actually, but then I had some problems with the Android stuff, and I think there's a big gap between Android and iPhone kind of stuff. So some of the things that work for Apple might not be the ideal tool for Android. So I wouldn't give any advice on that. I would not be authorized to do that. I think I'm not authority on that. That's an interesting question.
Next question is, what kind of test strategy would you follow if you look at the amount of fragmentation?
I'm not really sure what's meant with fragmentation, but I think it's a very good question, because if you look in my mind map of things that you could test, it's an awfully lot. And if you look at the average development time of a mobile app, it's short. So probably it will not fit all. So you need to make some decisions. I think the best strategy would try to align with your business and try to explain why you do certain tests. And if you have a good story why you want to do those tests and what that means for the business, then you probably pick the right tests. And if you don't, yeah, then you might want to consider other ones. But there's a lot of hygienic tests, of course, just the ordinary functional tests that you still need to do. But if you're developing with an app boutique, well, maybe they can do a lot of that. But remember, the functionality is limited of an app compared to an ordinary application, of course. I hope that suits the question.
The next question is, what benefits are there to a hybrid app over a website for a shop? And should businesses invest in maintaining both?
Whoa, that's a very good question. I don't really have the answer ready, I think. I think the hybrid thing would be suited best if you want to have local information available, or if you want to have people scrolling your catalog without being on the internet. So I know a friend that has the app so we're doing some music stuff. So it's a music instrument store, and he has that on the app, and he really likes to be able at any time to say, like, well, I found this instrument. Look, this is what I have. So he's more using it as a reference guide than buying it. So there might be some advantage to having that locally, but then when you're in the Netherlands, most of the times you have 3G and Wi-Fi anyway. So then that's not really a clear thing. I think hybrid helps. You should think about situations, that might be the answer. You should think about situations in which internet connection is expensive or not always available, but there's still need to do something with the web shop kind of stuff. I hope that gives you some clue in the right direction.
The next question here is, in one of the first slides, it was written, how mobile test is embedded in DLC. What's DLC exactly?
It's the development life cycle. And I hope I try to explain that it's not about doing those tests. I see some message about network connection problems. I hope that's not really. But I started up in the left bottom corner with tests that we could do. And in the rest of my presentation, I try to explain that we're doing those tests because we design certain things and build them according to the design. And that we make those decisions because we want to achieve certain goals. And that is what I, in this case, refer to as the development life cycle. It's not just the building, it's the thinking about what we're going to build and the designing of it as well.
The next question here is, what is the best way to manage mobile app device testing when there are new devices and platform upgrades all the time?
What's the best way? Could you repeat it again? It was difficult to do it.
Yeah, no problem. It says here, what is the best way to manage mobile apps device testing when there are new devices and platform upgrades all the time?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, one thing is do it automated, because then it's more easy to repeat your tests for a different platform. I think you should keep good track of your statistics about what kind of platforms actually are being used by your users. I've explained a little bit like elderly people will probably not be up to date anyway, so it might not be a true issue. And I think you need to make selections for that, because otherwise you drive yourself crazy. So trying to get people to advise you on which updates are really impacting your services and which are not.
The next, excuse me, the next question I have here, Derk-Jan, is, do you think 2014 would be the year test budgets are finally given the respect they deserve? It seems that apps are released willy-nilly, particularly because they are free apps. Even though they are free, they have to work in order to create future revenue and maintain good name for the creator for future developments.
So I think the question says, like, we all know that if an app gets negative comments in the App Store, on the market, or in the blogs, it will not be used anymore. So you have great damage. So the question will be, knowing that and having that customer feedback, will that enable us to do our testing better because we have solid proof for that? Well, I like that. I think in certain cases that happens, but I think a lot of app developers, but I'm not sure about that. So it's just my impression. So I'm not saying that's the truth. Are very good in building apps and think it's easy to just click things together and then it works. And you don't really have the testing vision like we have. But yeah, it could help. It could help, and especially if we have connection with the traditional world. So we have the app, which is quite simple and easily built, and it has little functionality. But we take into consideration the back office interconnection, etc. And we say, like, we can have a good app, but you still have bad reviews if the back office connection is not working. So yeah, could be.
Question is, should we start testing website or with the mobile app?
Yeah, but I think you should trace in your organization how many of your users are actually accessing your website by using the mobile app or traditional ways. So get those metrics installed before you start running.
The next question is, whose responsibility is it to come up with the actual physical devices, the test company or the app company?
I don't think there's a generic answer for that. I think that there is something, and Julian is writing in his book quite a lot about building the app lab or the test lab for mobile, where you need to have certain devices available. There are of course companies that provide you with devices, so you can hire that. I've seen solutions where you can connect physical devices to your server and access them from the cloud. So you can have a generic place where you have all the apps available, and from wherever in the organization you can claim your device and do some testing. But it's a problem, and I think a lot of people are still struggling with that. But the true answer lies, of course, in your mobile strategy. Because how many are you going to do, how much are you going to do with mobile in the future? So if you cannot answer that as an organization, you might not want to invest in buying every device that's out in the market, because it's just building one app and it's just a minor part of your revenue. But if you say like, well, I'm going over to the mobile and I expect them to do more on mobile, and I expect like 80% of my transactions to run over mobile, that might be enough reason to invest a little bit more in having physical devices ready, or have a solution that you can hire them.
The next question I have here is, mobile testing or simulators, how accurate is it?
Well, I don't know. There probably are differences. So there will be a lot of things that you test on your emulated environment because it's cheap and it's easy. There are some tests that you actually want to do on your physical device. You can't do everything on your physical device because then you would have to buy an awfully lot of devices. So there's the mix in between. I think it's a risk-based decision, and it's about knowing what kind of devices are being used by the majority of your organization. So like if you have those statistics, that would be great, right? If you know that 90% of your mobile revenue is created on an Apple, maybe you should get an Apple. But if it's an Android, yeah.
The next question I have here, and it's another long question, so if you need me to repeat it, I will.
Yeah, I think that would be, if that's okay, the last question as well, especially if it's a long question, because I have meetings to attend as well.
Okay, well, the next question I have here is, product owners are most of the time ready to spend for functionality testing. On the other hand, they ignore performance testing. However, most products are hated by the end users for the poor performance. Have you any nice statement to motivate them for performance testing?
Well, I don't think it has anything to do with mobile. It's a generic agile kind of stuff then. No, I don't have a nice statement. Maybe if we use app testing and we have limited functionality, we get more room to think about the non-functionals. And it might be good to do some survey things because, well, performance is a big issue, of course, if you have limited devices.
The next question is, how mature are organizations?
I think the connection, and that's not because I said it was the last question, but Derek, your connection, I could not hear you.
Yeah, Derk-Jan, I think Dara's connection has, Dara, I think your connection is coming and going there. We might have to wrap it up there. Thanks to Derk-Jan for his time and for presenting today. I think everybody found that a valuable presentation. And thanks to everybody for attending as well. This webinar is now concluded. Goodbye.
Yeah, I'll just say I really enjoyed the questions because you came up with some very creative and interesting questions. You saw me struggle sometimes with answering. So thanks for being with me and asking those questions.
Thanks, Derk-Jan.